This is Saguaro National Park. Saguaro National Park is divided into two sections. The western section is at lower elevation and has a higher density of saguaro cacti, and the eastern section is at higher elevation with a lower density of saguaro. Camping is only allowed in the eastern section, and we got to see the vast majority of it given our day-by-day itinerary here. Saguaro East was designated a national monument by President Herbert Hoover on March 1, 1933. It wasn't until 1961 that Saguaro West was added to this. Later, 1994 was when officially Saguaro became a national park. I didn't know what to expect at Saguaro apart from heat and sun, but as you can see here, there's quite a bit of plant biodiversity out there. We started our hike at 2,700 feet and maxed out at 8,500 feet. This meant that day one started off with a hot desert climb, something that we would get used to over the next 5 days. We initially had slotted for 12.5 miles on day one, but it was 95 degrees on the desert floor, sun beating down on us. A park ranger had suggested we try an alternative route and start at the Douglas Spring Trailhead and chop off about 6 miles. There was only one water source on day one. If we would have tried to do the full mileage, we wouldn't have made it to the water source before running out. After checking out of the visitor center, we all put on our sun gear and started off on our hike. After a couple miles of hiking in the hot sun, we finally found our first evidence of our water source. We had been drinking water that was about the temperature of bath water. Not enjoyable.
How's it feel?
Lukewarm.
Alright.
Bridal Reef Falls and Degarski just hopped in. How did it feel, Alex?
It's amazing. It was like, it's still kind of a trickle really, but it's like a good 15 degrees cooler here in the shade for one, and then that water feels incredible. No, it's truly an oasis for us.
Yep.
Well, we've been hiking at 94-degree weather, straight up. We've done about 1,000 feet, zero shade. We find ourselves crouching under these little pockets of shade that we're probably only getting 15% shade. This is nice.
Found our oasis for the time being.
Yep, gonna enjoy it.
Filling up our water was no easy task.
Nature has provided, but it's a little tricky with the wind.
You take a giant fish and wrap it just
After quenching our thirst and cooling our bodies, we took a well-deserved rest. We continued our ascent and saw new plants and flowers along the way. We got to Douglas Spring Camp before sunset. It was tight quarters and a little bit buggy, but a welcome reprieve from baking in the sun all day. We settled into our sunset spot for the night and took it easy.
Good spot down there. We're not stirring up any crap.
We found our water source and our spot to hang out for the night. Time for dinner.
settling down a little bit.
Each campsite we stayed at had its own bear box, which was nice so that we didn't have to carry supplies to hide food from the bears, and also had a latrine, which felt like luxury and made life a lot easier on trail. Day 1 was a sobering slap in the face. We figured out just how exposed we would be to the heat and the elements, even though it was only April. Us 3 Minnesota boys were fish out of water. Luckily, we took the advice from the park ranger at the permitting office and tried to make our first day more manageable. Best decision ever. We had a warm welcome with warm water at Saguaro. We quickly learned how precious of a resource this would end up being throughout the rest of our trip. Day 2 had a monster itinerary. We had 5,000 feet of climbing that day. And anytime I hear 5,000 feet of climbing in a day of backpacking, I start to get a little bit nauseous. We started off the day early by going up 1,000 feet to Cowhead Saddle and then descending that same 1,000 feet before starting another 3,000 foot ascent towards Manning Camp before one last climb of the day to Spud Rock. As we got higher and higher, the views got better and better. By starting our day early, we beat some of the hot temperatures and were provided at least a little bit of shade by the desert thorn scrub.
Yeah, I'm happy to do either way. So, if you guys want to do it, I'm happy doing that. Find a nice shaded spot with a view.
About 8:30 in the morning on day number 2, 3.25 miles in, and getting some views here of the valley down below. Just wonderful. Continuing our hike. Just about to have breakfast.
And we did it. We found a nice shaded spot with a view.
Yep. Looks like it's intermittently shaded
Yeah.
with some of these trees, so that'd be nice. This is not a bad camp.
Other than the horseshoe.
The horse show, not that idea.
Grass Shack, 4.5 miles in. We got Garski cooling off the dogs, getting his feet a little bit wet, doing some laundry.
Got Middle Eastern owl over here.
Yep. Saving ourselves from the sun. We got 3,000 feet of climbing coming up. Beautiful little creek. Nice little stopping point before we put in some work.
It's a big filter in here.
Yep.
8 liters of fresh water.
Lots of water consumption going on.
Yep.
More than yesterday.
This trip might be the most water all of us consume on a backpacking trip.
At least 15 collectively.
Yeah.
Yep, we're just trying to play catch up now.
We ran across a group of horseback riders at Grass Shack Camp, and they also filled up with water.
First snake on day 2. Not exactly sure what type it is. We'll have to do some research after the fact. Pretty thin, maybe about 2.5 feet long. We'll let them be and soak the sun though.
We were fighting a 3,000 foot climb in the midday sun, but at least the trail was well maintained. We got up to the Madrean woodlands and came across some white-tailed deer. It was a little surprising to come across these, knowing that this same species puts up with a lot of cold in the Minnesota winters, just like us. The deer trailed off, but we came across some other species of wildlife shortly after.
Well, oddly enough, we're getting more of the wildlife.
These greater shorthorn lizards were less commonly seen than the ornate tree lizards, and we saw a couple each day. One of the park rangers tried to convince us these were horny toads. Part of today's hike was along the Arizona Trail, which runs north-south throughout the whole state of Arizona. The Arizona Trail Association was established in 1994, but full completion of this trail was not done until 2011, when it became one of the 11 National Scenic Trails. With about 2/3 of the climbing done for the day, we got to Manning Camp, where interns, park rangers, and volunteers were taking part in a Mexican spotted owl survey. This species of owl is listed as threatened by both the United States and Mexican governments. Out of the 19 species of owls in North America, only 4 are larger in size. Manning Cabin was built in 1905. It's mainly used by biological and backcountry researchers, but we didn't know that.
Just got to Manning Cabin and walked into this really neat rustic cabin that we didn't really know anything about, but we stumbled upon a cabinet here that says everything in this cabinet is up for grabs. Let's take a peek. Ooh. Seasoning, peanut butter, Miller Lite.
Oh my god, look at all those canned foods down there.
Oh, there's some gummy bears.
Oh, what THC gummies?
Prickly pear gummy bear.
Jackpot!
Oh my god, there's fuel up there. It's time for a Miller Lite, huh?
Definitely.
Time to crack it.
Wow.
After polishing off our pilfered pilsners, we found peace and paused for lunch at Manning Camp. Shortly after, we rose in elevation enough to see our first snowfall of the trip. Quite a change from yesterday. On the way up to Devil's Bathtub, and of course it wouldn't be a trip without finding one of these guys. So, antler's perfectly fine to take, but you just cannot take skulls from national parks and wildlife areas and national forests if the antlers are attached. So guys, coming home with me. As we descended down into camp, we were greeted by one of my favorite landscapes, an aspen forest. After dropping off some things at camp, we went out for a bonus adventure, looking for some better views of Rincon Peak, and we found them. Camping amongst the pines meant that we didn't get great views at bedtime. However, we did have ample opportunity to pick up free, cheap, easy firewood to keep us warm at night. Didn't necessarily need the warmth though. We were hoping it would get cooler, but actually it still was around mid-40s throughout the whole night. Not as chilly as we would have liked. It made for another clammy night in Saguaro. On day 3, we summited Rincon Peak, the namesake of the area. We had some relatively flat hiking to start the day before descending down to Happy Valley where we would camp that night. We dropped off some gear, had breakfast, and got ready for the 3,000-foot climb up to the top of the mountain. We had lunch amongst the clouds at the peak. Ridge running gave us great views all morning of Spud Rock where we camped the night before, as well as Rincon Peak. First clouds of the trip. Day 3, morning. And we welcomed those clouds with open arms. Getting those rocks out.
Never ending. Rocks, pine needles, sand.
Camped over that way last night. Right by the rock face. Beautiful day, birds chirping. I think we were all a little surprised to see just how many layers of mountains this area had. Half mile of bonus miles to Happy Valley Lookout. Pack free. Makes it easy. Looking at Rincon Peak here, which we will be summiting later today. We dropped off some supplies at camp to lighten our backpacks and had breakfast at the base of Rincon, stocking up on calories before our big ascent for that day.
Near halfway up Rincon Peak. Taking a break. What do you got to say, Bolzer?
So far, it's been a pretty nice hike, actually. The temperature's been good. It's been overcast, which has been really nice. Not too steep yet. A little thick at times, kind of plowing through some stuff. But yeah, 2/3 of the mile's done. Only about a little over a third of the vert. So that means it's going to get steep.
Darn right. Agar, how you feeling?
Pretty sweaty, but it could be a lot worse if our packs were fully loaded. Right now we just got lunch and water, but making progress.
As we ascended through layers of the trees, we got some previews of the views we were about to see at the top. It can be challenging to appreciate the beauty that's all around you during these particularly tough hot hikes, but we remained grateful. We approached the summit and signed ourselves in at the registry, noticing that there was a surprisingly few amount of people on it, especially given the proximity to Tucson. We finished our 3,000-foot climb and were rewarded with lunch and some 360-degree views. Rincon Peak is the second tallest mountain in Saguaro National Park. Its runoff drains into the Gila River watershed. Rincon is Spanish for the word corner, which refers to the topographic outline of the Rincon mountain range. Coming down from Rincon Peak, and it is still steep, just as steep as it was on the way up. And a little tough on the knees, but that's all right. Making work of it, and a little bit more bushwhacking than we're used to. People travel this trail about every couple days, so not too frequently. But looking forward to a nice warm meal tonight. Loved seeing the unique scaly skin on these alligator junipers just before our arrival into camp. Garsky found us a spot to soak in the sunset that night, along with views of the mountain that we conquered that day.
Rincon's looking great.
Another day of solitude. We only saw one other day hiker with his dog and 2 other volunteers who were very familiar with the area and told us that we were lucky that it was such a wet winter and that we had access to all this water. Sure didn't feel like it. Days like these can seem to go by so fast, despite how daunting they look on paper. You just have to get lost in the right, left movement of your feet. It's almost like music all day long. Day 4 was a banger. We started off with a big downhill descent through a thicket of thorns before breakfast. We stocked up on water and started another hot, sunny, exposed climb. All in all, about 19 miles and nearly 5,000 feet of gain. We started off early and took in some views while we were still at elevation.
A couple of the dangerous thorny plants out here we've been having to deal with. Leg's been eaten up by the thorns along this trail. A little bit of bushwhacking, but not too much right now, but the thorns have been primarily the issue. Just going down on this descent here towards Manning Camp Trailhead and breakfast. Rincon in the distance.
The overgrown and underutilized trail did a number on our gear, our skin, and our spirits. We had to choose between putting pants on and suffering in the heat, or going bare-legged and suffering some scars. The saving grace of this part of the trail is that we eventually got to see an arboretum of flowers in bloom. Unfortunately, we were about 3 weeks early for the saguaro bloom, which often blooms towards the end of May, but this year was more towards the beginning of May. Saguaro flowers bloom for less than 24 hours, opening at night and remaining open through the next day. They only have that very short time to attract pollinators like bats. The whole saguaro, though, can produce many blooms throughout a season. The flowers are a milky white and emit a sweet nectar which attracts multiple species of bats. These bats feast on the flower nectar and in process act as a pollinator for the cactus. As the cactus produces fruit, the bats will start to eat the fruits and in turn help to spread the saguaro seeds across the desert. Only a few of these seeds actually sprout, and even fewer grow to maturity.
Navigating through prickly pears of great size here.
Late morning came, and we eventually found some running water and shade. That's a recipe for breakfast. Breakfast spot at Rincon Creek, 5 miles in. The trail became more defined as we navigated the desert thorn scrub. We eventually descended deep enough to get back to Saguaro country, and we saw quite a few. I carried about 4 liters of water on me at any given time, and took in about 1 liter every 2 miles or so. So all in all, probably took in nearly 3 gallons of water per day. We found a spot to hang our hats for lunch midway through our ascent. Filtering water at our lunch spot, day 4.
A little slimy.
Little slimy.
So are we though.
Yeah, matches the men, so you are what you eat.
We continued to follow the red blazes along the trail and found ourselves at Tanque Verde Peak, one of the high points at 7,000 feet. Tanque Verde Peak is the tallest mountain in the Tanque Verde Valley, which was originally used by the Apache tribe throughout the 19th century. The Tanque Verde community is just northeast of Tucson and is where retired Milwaukee brewer J.J. Hardy played his high school ball. Tanque Verde Peak was not too far from where we were staying that night at Juniper Basin. We crossed paths with another hiker at Juniper Basin who was making his way up to Tanque Verde Peak for some sunset pictures. We met up with him again later and shared a campfire night with him, swapping stories and giving him some advice in terms of backpacking, as he was new to the scene from the East Coast, now heading out west to explore some national parks there before ending up at a job in Reno. His name was Lucas, and he is a budding photographer. His work can be found at ljac.me. We set up camp at Juniper Basin alongside a wash where our water source was. We collected some firewood in preparation for later that night. The Alexes ventured out and found us a prime spot for soaking in the sunset over supper that night. This sunset would prove to be the best of the trip. We had a 7-mile hike out on the last day to get back to civilization. It was all downhill from here, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was going to be easy. It got hotter and hotter as the day progressed, as we got lower and lower, and it was all in all 3,500 feet of descent in just 7 miles. Such a unique landscape that we got to explore. The tallest saguaro was 78 feet tall, but fell down in 1986. Crazy, because these things grow only between 1 and 1.5 inches the first 8 years of life. We had a full day of descending before we could make it back home, which just meant that it progressively got hotter and hotter as we went along. It was nearly impossible to find shade as we left the woodland and got down to thorn scrub near the desert floor, but we eventually got lucky and found a nice big rock to set up against for our breakfast. Something unique about this trip is that we were never more than a day hike away from a trailhead. It was surprising how few people we ran into, given the proximity to Tucson, with a population of over 1 million people in the metro area. Instead, we were wished adios amigos by one of these little guys. And that's a wrap on the trip. Lots of heat, lots of sun, never enough water, never enough shade. That's what you get when you head to Saguaro.